Hey everyone. In my last video, I shared my ranking of all the Star Wars TV shows from worst to best, and I enjoyed making that video so much that today I'll be turning my attention over to the Star Wars movies. As with the Star Wars TV shows, this was a very difficult list to make because all the Star Wars movies are very different. They have their own strengths and weaknesses, and because of that, my opinion has gone back and forth over the years. Unlike the TV shows, I had time to go back and rewatch all the Star Wars movies in order of release, so now I have fresh and updated thoughts on each of them. For this video, I'm going to be ranking the 12 full-length Star Wars movies that received a wide theatrical release, so TV movies and specials do not count. I watched the theatrical versions of the original trilogy because those are the versions I felt like watching, and then I watched the 4K versions for all the other movies, just so you know what I'm basing this ranking on. Fair warning that I'm going to be taking a slightly different approach with this video. I was pretty level-headed the entire time throughout the last video, even with the shows that I was very critical of. However, I'm very passionate about the Star Wars movies, and now that they're fresh on my mind, I have a lot to say about the ones lower on the list, so I'm going to be more critical and maybe even heated near the beginning of the video. I don't want anyone to think I'm being negative simply for the sake of doing so. Even the bad Star Wars movies are a lot of fun to talk about, and understanding what those movies did wrong can help you better appreciate what the good movies do right. And the same disclaimer as the TV ranking, keep in mind that this is just my opinion. I tried to be as fair and objective as possible, but ultimately it boils down to personal opinion. Don't forget to share your Star Wars movie ranking down in the comments, because I'm sure we all have wildly different opinions on these movies, and if you like hearing my thoughts on the franchise, be sure to leave a like and subscribe so you never miss a video. With all that said, why don't we dive into this and see how I rank all 12 Star Wars movies from worst to best. Starting off in last place, I'm sure this will come as a shock to no one, we have the Clone Wars movie. If you watch my TV ranking, you know that I'm a very big fan of the TV series. It's some of my favorite Star Wars content, and I do have a lot of fond memories of this movie. It was the start of the Clone Wars, and it was the first Star Wars movie I saw in theaters, so that was very cool for a kid. Unfortunately, it's no secret that the Clone Wars does not hold up well at all. The plot is dumb, it's not interesting seeing the Jedi try to rescue Jabba the Hutt's son. The early Clone Wars animation is roughed and unfinished in several places. I love this version of Anakin Skywalker, and I like his dynamic with Ahsoka Tano, who became another of my favorite Star Wars characters, but the movie missed an opportunity to develop Anakin's character. This movie is supposed to take place shortly after Attack of the Clones, yet this version of Anakin is already acting the way he does at the beginning of Revenge of the Sith. The original Clone Wars books and comics did a good job of making Anakin's transition from Padawan to Jedi Knight gradual over the course of the war. They didn't necessarily have to go in that route, but I think the Clone Wars movie could have been that transition between Padawan Anakin and Revenge of the Sith Anakin. This movie is fine as an introduction to the TV series, but it fails to represent the Clone Wars at its best. Moving on to the live action films, we have The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi.
It is bad, very bad. And I am sad, very sad.
Now, while I don't like the direction that The Force Awakens took the sequel trilogy in, and there was a lot of pressure on the next two movies to be more original, The Last Jedi simply fails to properly build on what The Force Awakens set up. It feels like Rian Johnson is actively going out of his way to negate everything that J.J. Abrams did with The Force Awakens because it's not what he wanted this trilogy to be. Not to mention, almost every scene is full of plot holes. Like, why does the Resistance use vulnerable, slow-moving bombers when Y-Wings exist? If they can contact allies one at a time and have a ship that can jump to hyperspace without the First Order noticing, why didn't they use that instead of hatching an elaborate scheme? Why would Holdo not tell anyone her plan when it gets to the point of mutiny? This isn't just me being nitpicky. I can go through this movie almost scene by scene and point out so many things that just don't add up. Many of the characters are inconsistent with how they were portrayed in The Force Awakens, particularly General Hux and Snoke. I don't like what they did with Finn. I thought he was just as interesting as Rey in The Force Awakens. I thought they were going to remain on equal footing, but he's relegated to a side quest. But of course, the worst offender is the utter character assassination of Luke Skywalker. I have tried tried to love this version of Luke. I have tried to reconcile it with the previous movies. I have tried to defend it in the past, but I just can't anymore. This is not Luke Skywalker. This is Luke Skywalker.
Maybe he's Jake Skywalker. He's not my Luke Skywalker.
Apart from Luke, a lot of this movie is really depressing to watch. Star Wars is no stranger to dark movies full of tragedy, but this was the first time it made me feel depressed. There's a difference between the kind of dark that keeps you engaged and the kind of dark that makes you wish you were anywhere else. The movie also has a lot of messages that are either bad or don't make sense for a Star Wars movie. Rey didn't really need to learn anything from Luke, she just needed to realize she had everything she needed to begin with. Poe realizes he needed to shut up and blindly follow Holdo's authority, a strange lesson for an anti-authoritarian movie like Star Wars. A lot of Last Jedi apologetics, and I know this because I used to be one of them, tried to defend this movie by saying that it's original or it took Star Wars in a new direction, and it really didn't. It mostly recreates familiar plot lines and scenes and tropes from previous Star Wars movies just so it can then subvert them. And I think that's a missed opportunity to actually do something different. Like, if Finn had remained one of the main characters and maintained his rivalry with Kylo Ren, they could have switched up who's teaming up against who in every movie. Force Awakens would be Finn and Rey versus Kylo. If Rey joined the dark side, Last Jedi could be her and Kylo versus Finn. And then if they go through with Kylo's redemption in Rise of Skywalker, then it could be him and Finn versus Rey. Not saying they have to do that, I'm just spitballing options. If you're going to subvert expectations and do something different, then actually do something different. The Last Jedi is beautifully made, entertaining at times, and there are intriguing aspects to the narrative, and that's the only thing that keeps it from being dead last. At number 10 is The Rise of Skywalker.
Okay, I'm out.
If I'm being perfectly honest, The Rise of Skywalker and Last Jedi are equally bad in different ways, but I rank Rise of Skywalker higher simply because it's a more enjoyable movie. The most glaring issue is that it tries to do way too much at the last minute. I understand the difficult position J.J. Abrams was in when he agreed to direct this movie. He had 2 years to get it done. The production was so fast and hectic they had to edit the movie as they were filming it, but it's hard to be fully sympathetic for him when he's actively going out of his way to make his job harder. The movie continually wastes time adding new stuff instead of working with what the trilogy already had. They try to cover this up with a lightning fast pace so the audience can't process all the plot holes, but that also means they can't process the good stuff either. Bringing Palpatine back was a mistake, especially when the movie barely focuses on him or his relationship with Rey. Rey's new abilities make her feel even more overpowered because the sequels never gave her any room to grow. And the Final Order fleet of 10,000 Star Destroyers, each one that can destroy a planet.
Oh, absolutely not. No chance. The very idea is preposterous.
Ridiculous threat levels require a ridiculous explanation for why the bad guys can overcome it. I mean, you've got thousands of planet-killing Star Destroyers and you're telling me their weakness is that they can't go up? Or they're not smart enough to chart a hyperspace course around the big red nebula instead of going through it. Like, it's not like it surrounds the whole planet. Can they really not go anywhere else? It's also weird that the movie revolves around a scavenger hunt to find Exegol when the audience already knows what it looks like and the bad guys know how to get there. Rey versus Palpatine completely fails to understand why Return of the Jedi's ending worked. And that really sums up the sequel trilogy's main problem, is that they wanted to recreate many scenes from the original movies without understanding the context that made them work in the first place. It would have been more interesting if Ben Solo had lived and had to actively make up for what he did the rest of his life. That would have distinguished him from Darth Vader. Rey burying the lightsabers on Tatooine is dumb, disrespectful, and it clashes with her calling herself a Skywalker because it represents her burying the Skywalker legacy and making a new one. Like any Star Wars movie, there are some good things here. The final celebration is beautiful and heartfelt. This is my favorite looking movie of the sequel trilogy. It's one of C-3PO's best movies, even if they negate his sacrifice. The final battle is fun, even if it's insanely over the top. And while they may have mishandled Han, Luke, and Leia, they didn't ruin Lando. So there's that. Jumping from the end of the saga back to the beginning, we have The Phantom Menace. Right from the get-go, the first 30 minutes of this movie just don't work at all. The script is checking all the right boxes, but it's not executed in a way that carries any weight. The prequel trilogy receives a lot of criticism for wooden acting, and I think that this mostly applies to The Phantom Menace. Things get more interesting when the characters arrive on Tatooine, but staying there is utterly pointless. The Jedi say it's too dangerous to call for help and that they have no other options, yet Lucas seems to forget that in the very first Star Wars movie, Obi-Wan hired a smuggler in this exact situation, and that was when the Empire was in power. There is no logical reason for the characters staying on Tatooine other than having an excuse for the pod race to happen. Speaking more broadly, The Phantom Menace is also a bad introduction to the Star Wars saga. It doesn't properly explain what the Force is and adds a biological component that contradicts how Yoda explained it in the originals.
Luminous beings, Zoe, not this crude matter.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they ever use the word lightsaber in the movie. I think Anakin just says laser sword. And The Phantom Menace hurts the prequel trilogy as a whole by not developing the three key relationships: Anakin and Obi-Wan, Anakin and Padme, Anakin and Palpatine. These are the three main elements that the entire trilogy revolves around, and The Phantom Menace wastes time by not doing anything with them. Anakin and Obi-Wan barely interact at all. Anakin and Padme can't have any romantic scenes because Natalie Portman was 10 years older than Jake Lloyd at the time, so that would have been weird. And Palpatine doesn't speak to Anakin or show any interest until the end of the movie. Attack of the Clones would have been a much better beginning, with some elements from The Phantom Menace mixed in. As great as Duel of the Fates is, the finale is a mess, which Lucas himself admitted on the DVD commentary.
It's bold in terms of jerking people around, but I may have gone too far in a few places.
Look, I love George Lucas. I respect his vision for Star Wars. For me, the highest level of canon that outranks everything else will always be his movies and the Clone Wars. Unfortunately, this doesn't change that the Star Wars saga deserved a much better Episode 1. Then at number 8, we have Attack of the Clones. I've come to see Attack of the Clones as an okay movie. I used to have it ranked a lot higher on my list, but I realized that I was being overly appreciative simply because of the basic improvements it makes over The Phantom Menace. The movie has better acting, more color, better direction, and more banter and emotional scenes between the characters. But even with these changes, Attack of the Clones has plenty of its own problems. This was one of the first major blockbusters that switched to all digital cameras, and Lucas had a much greater emphasis on digital effects, and that makes the movie an awkward visual transition between the dull yet practical feel of The Phantom Menace and the refined CGI of Revenge of the Sith. The movie is centered on Anakin and Padme's romance, and it isn't believable. These two haven't seen each other in 10 years, and Anakin has so many questionable moments throughout the movie. I'd be willing to accept them having feelings for each other at the end, but being in love and getting married,
I don't buy it.
I like Anakin and Obi-Wan in the movie, but their writing is a bit inconsistent at times, and that's especially noticeable at the beginning of the movie because they constantly go through a role reversal. For example, Anakin is shown as the reckless one who wants to find out who's trying to kill Padme, yet Obi-Wan is the one who jumps out of the window for the droid, even though that was not a smart decision. Obi-Wan is also presented as the one who doesn't like politicians and doesn't trust them, yet later it's Anakin who expresses this sentiment. Anakin and Padme falling in love would have been more impactful if Anakin didn't want to be there and they didn't get along at first. And Obi-Wan said he wasn't interested in this investigation so he could feel he's just a pawn for the Jedi Council and could worry that Qui-Gon was right and this is how Dooku gets into his head. The movie is also very conversation heavy, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, they just needed to balance it more with action. The mystery of the clone army and Obi-Wan's investigation are interesting, but raises several questions that aren't answered. Like, how did the Jedi not figure out Dooku hired Jango when he goes right to Geonosis after Obi-Wan finds him on Kamino? There's still a lot of good stuff here, especially near the end. I love the arena scenes, and the Geonosis battle is awesome. Attack of the Clones succeeds in laying the foundation for Anakin's turn to the dark side and the fall of the Republic, but it's really only a slight improvement over Phantom Menace. At number 7, we have Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens. I was really conflicted on where to place this movie because I actually enjoyed it quite a bit on this rewatch. The Force Awakens is an entertaining movie with good characters and an engaging story, but as I was writing the script for this video, I realized just how many problems I had, and I didn't have enough good things to say that would balance that out and justify putting it any higher on the list. The Force Awakens is a bad sequel, it lacks originality, doesn't fit with Lucas's saga, and the insistence on following A New Hope's plot structure so closely limits the story and the characters from reaching their full potential. It jumps into the story too quickly without exploring the state of the galaxy or getting to know Finn. Rey is overpowered and she masters new skills too easily. Luke Skywalker sits the whole movie out and his new Jedi Order has already been destroyed, so whether that works or not was completely dependent on the next movies. Han reverts back to who he was in A New Hope, which sucks after all his character development, and overall the plot comes across as a hollow imitation of the Rebel-Empire conflict. Just like Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker, The Force Awakens attempts to repeat the original trilogy visually without understanding the context that made it work. One of the most frustrating examples is near the end. This is why I dislike Rey versus Kylo Ren so much, is because she defeats him using the dark side, but the movie portrays it as a good thing. At first it looks like she's the one who's going to fight with calm determination while Kylo is unbalanced by his rage, but then she becomes just as angry and aggressive as him, and that's how she wins the fight, and then the movie plays uplifting music. Generally, when the hero wins this way in Star Wars, the movies portray it as a bad thing, a weakness that anger and aggression lead to the dark side, so it kind of makes the scene the antithesis of what Star Wars is about. Disney made it very clear from the beginning that recreating the style and tone of the original trilogy came first and a logical story came second. This is why, at least on paper, I prefer Lucas's original plan for the sequels, because he was more interested in continuing the story in a way that made sense in universe. A lot of people tried to defend this movie by saying that it was the sequels that really went off the rails, and while that's true to an extent, the open-ended nature of the story left room for so many problems. A movie should be able to stand on its own and not rely on sequels to fix its glaring issues. Even with these flaws, The Force Awakens is a well-made, well-structured movie with lots of emotion, and that makes for a good movie-going experience, but it's really frustrating as a sequel and doesn't fit into the overall Star Wars saga. Moving into the top half of the list, we have Solo, A Star Wars Story. Solo is not as big or ambitious as the movies lower on the list, but it's still really fun and has a less messy story. It's nice every once in a while to have a simple, standalone Star Wars story that can just be a good time at the movies. Alden Ehrenreich is definitely not a young Harrison Ford. Ewan McGregor's Obi-Wan Kenobi set a new standard for casting, but I still think he's a good Han Solo. I'll certainly take him over a deep-fake Harrison Ford any day of the week. Most of the characters are good and work well off each other. I especially like Donald Glover as Lando Calrissian. Even so, this movie tries to cram way too much of Han's backstory into 2 hours. This is why I prefer the Han Solo trilogy of books by A.C. Crispin, because that spread Han's backstory over several years. The biggest problem is that this is easily the ugliest Star Wars movie ever made. The lighting is abysmal.
Something's not right because now I can't see.
The best explanation I could come up with is that they were trying to rely mostly on natural lighting to create a grimy, seedy underworld feel, but that only works in a couple of scenes. Star Wars films are known for their outstanding visuals, and movies in general are known for letting the audience see what's going on. Ultimately, Solo gets Han's story half right. It shows how he got into the life of smuggling and why he was such a selfish person in the originals. But the ending where he says he's nothing like Beckett and helps out the rebel faction means that he goes through a hero's journey that he's not supposed to have until A New Hope. The movie also never made me believe that Han and Lando are friends, which hurts The Empire Strikes Back because it doesn't make any sense that Han would go to him for help. Even with these problems, Solo is definitely not the messiest Star Wars script I've ever seen, and as a whole, I think it's a very fun Han Solo adventure. Getting into the top 5, we have Rogue One, A Star Wars Story.
Rogue One? There is no Well, there is now.
Many fans consider this the best Star Wars movie of the Disney era, and there's a good reason for that. From beginning to end, Rogue One is a visual masterpiece. This is easily one of the best looking Star Wars films. And out of all the Star Wars movies Disney has produced, this is the one that actually adds something meaningful to the existing saga. It's a good transition from Revenge of the Sith to A New Hope. It explores the development of the rebellion and shows their morally gray side. And it makes A New Hope's story more compelling by revealing the tragedy that led to the rebellion's victory. Rogue One embraces tragedy right from the beginning, which immediately invests us in the characters. The first act is admittedly very messy, first with a time skip and then jumping all over the galaxy with a ton of exposition dumps. But once the setup is out of the way and the stakes become clear, then the movie becomes really great. It has some of the most tear-jerking scenes in Star Wars, especially Galen's speech to Jyn where she finally just collapses and lets everything out. I like all of the characters and their unique backgrounds and motivations. I wish there had been more time to develop them fully or have them become close, but I think the movie works better when it's viewed as the development of the entire rebellion. A whole bunch of different characters and rebel factions thrust into the same situation who work together to defeat a powerful enemy. Like all Disney Star Wars projects, there are a lot of familiar and nostalgic elements, but it makes sense given the time and setting, and the movie balances that through its tone and by adding new stuff as well. I don't like the CGI Tarkin and Leia. They're distracting, and it set a bad trend that Star Wars is continuing to follow. The lighter, more fun tone of the third act means the movie doesn't feel entirely cohesive, but I think it works because it shows the rebellion choosing to embrace hope, and that hits harder after the darker tone of the first two acts. It also helps transition a little better into A New Hope. In terms of spectacle and action, the third act is phenomenal. I thoroughly enjoyed every second of it, and it was a very bold move having all the characters die. The ending works pretty well even without A New Hope because the characters don't know if their actions will pay off, but they choose to believe that it will. It's certainly not perfect, but Rogue One is the best Disney Star Wars movie that adds something meaningful to the existing saga. At number 4, we have Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi is a good movie and certainly deserves to be ranked above most of the others, but first I need to acknowledge the problem it has that hold it back from its full potential. It's a significant step down in quality from Empire, which can make it disappointing at times, and you can tell there was a bigger shift to making the movie appeal to kids rather than all ages.
Mostly.
As fun as they are, the Jabba's palace scenes go on for way too long, and Luke Skywalker's plan to rescue Han makes no sense. Sneaking in his friends one at a time just makes his job more difficult later, and if the script didn't guarantee that it would work, there's no reason that it should have. Endor is fun, but can be a bit boring for a while, and it occasionally feels like the story is killing time until we can get to the really interesting stuff. But even with those problems, Return of the Jedi still embodies everything that makes the original trilogy great. Fantastic filmmaking, strong characters, lighthearted fun and adventure. Everything with Luke is awesome. It's satisfying to see him as a Jedi after 3 movies, and the movie really gets great once he surrenders to Vader. All the scenes between Luke, Vader, and Palpatine on the Death Star are incredible. Luke rejecting the dark side and standing up to the Emperor is easily one of the best scenes in film history. The hero doesn't win by striking down the bad guy. He throws away his weapon and stands up and says, "No, I'm not going to be like you." It is such fantastic character work, and it inspires Vader to save his son and be the hero he was always destined to be. Vader's sacrifice and John Williams' score during his funeral makes me want to cry every time. It may be flawed compared to the rest of the original trilogy, but Return of the Jedi is still a classic film. It is a beautiful ending and a powerful conclusion to George Lucas's Star Wars saga. Alright, now we're getting into the top 3, the absolute best of the best. So coming in at number 3 is Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. Revenge of the Sith avoids some of the problems I had with Return of the Jedi, and therefore it's a better conclusion to its respective trilogy. The first two prequels were very flawed films, but once those issues were moved out of the way, all the aspects of the prequels that did work could finally shine through. I love the look of this movie. Lucas had finally refined the style he was going for while adding a touch more practicality and tying the aesthetic into A New Hope. Ewan McGregor is amazing as Obi-Wan. He gives a truly outstanding performance. Hayden Christensen is much better as Anakin, and his story is thoroughly engaging. The movie does still have to rush a bit because the first two movies wasted so much time. There was a great subplot with Padme and the other senators forming the foundation of the Rebel Alliance, but it had to be cut for time. At the same time, this keeps the story very focused on Anakin and his descent. Ian McDiarmid is brilliant as Palpatine. The way he manipulates Anakin, the Jedi, and the Republic is all fantastic. My one big gripe with the movie is that Anakin's turn to the dark side would have felt more believable if he was sent to capture the Jedi Temple instead of killing younglings. Based on the situation Palpatine has put him in, I can absolutely believe that he'd be ready to kill Jedi Masters, but Palpatine could have manipulated Anakin by saying they were going to hold the Jedi Temple hostage, and then once Anakin goes to kill the Separatists on Mustafar, Palpatine could lie and say that there was another rebellion and that all the other Jedi got caught in the crossfire. Other than that, I think the plot and the story are really solid. Everything on Mustafar with Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Padme is packed with tragedy and epic in scope. We get one of the best lightsaber duels we've ever seen in Star Wars. Yoda versus Palpatine in the Senate is also great, and it perfectly visualizes a battle between light and dark for the fate of the galaxy. The final pieces click into place with Anakin's transformation into Darth Vader, and the ending is incredibly sad but also contains a glimmer of hope. Revenge of the Sith was easily my favorite Star Wars movie as a kid, and I still have a soft spot for it all these years later. I think it is a fantastic addition to the Star Wars franchise that perfectly expands on the backstory of the original trilogy. Alright, this is it. At number 2, we have Star Wars, aka A New Hope. This movie had to at least be in the top 2. A New Hope is Star Wars. It defined what the franchise would be. It changed movies forever. It affected our entire culture. It's well crafted and masterfully edited from beginning to end. Not everything holds up because of the hectic production and because they had to invent a lot of this technology themselves, but even the spots that are noticeable add charm to the movie. Lucas succeeded in what he set out to do. It's true lighthearted fun and movie magic. The progression of the story feels seamless. It takes its time to properly set up these characters and the universe. Luke Skywalker remains, for me, the most relatable character in Star Wars, in large part thanks to Lucas incorporating the hero's journey archetype. The movie looks amazing even after 46 years, and a lot of the special effects still hold up. All the characters are fantastic. Han Solo, Princess Leia, R2-D2, C-3PO, Darth Vader. Every character in this movie is iconic and so well written and memorable. The Death Star battle is possibly the greatest movie finale of all time and has one of my favorite Star Wars moments where the X-Wings are zooming away from Darth Vader and the music swells and swells until Biggs is tragically killed. Han swooping in to save the day and Luke destroying the Death Star gets me every time, and the awards ceremony is a perfect happy ending. I don't have as much to say about this one as the other movies, but that's because A New Hope is a near perfect film that embodies everything Star Wars is at its core. And finally, at number 1 is The Empire Strikes Back. It may be cliche to call this the best Star Wars film, but I don't care. There's a reason so many people do. Empire took everything that worked about A New Hope and built on it to create a perfect movie. Every aspect of this film displays expert craftsmanship. The visual effects, the writing and plot structure, performances, themes, grand ideas, character development, not a single moment is wasted in Empire. There is always a clear cause and effect that drives the story forward. Luke's training with Yoda is always engaging. The nature of the Force and what it means to be a Jedi make the story feel larger than life. Han and Leia's romance is gripping and their entire side plot is engaging. And even after Revenge of the Sith and Rogue One, Empire still has the most emotionally devastating moments in the franchise. Luke versus Vader is superb and leads to the biggest plot twist in film history that changed how audiences view the trilogy. The cliffhanger ending with Han being taken to Jabba the Hutt makes things even worse, and a lot of people say that Empire isn't complete within itself, and I can't totally agree with that. In terms of the plot of this movie and the story coming full circle, in that way I think the movie is complete within itself. It's okay to leave some things for Return of the Jedi. Even after all these years, everything about The Empire Strikes Back is flawless, and it is easily the best Star Wars movie of all time. And there you have it. That's my ranking of all 12 Star Wars films from worst to best. Just like with my Star Wars TV ranking, this was a lot of fun to do. I liked getting to go back and watch these movies over again so I could give my updated thoughts on them. And I want to reiterate that no matter how critical or negative I may have gotten early on in the video, I still really enjoy the Star Wars franchise as a whole. Even the bad Star Wars movies are a lot of fun to talk about, and they can help you better understand and appreciate what the good movies do right. I think the evolution of the Star Wars franchise over the years is incredibly fascinating. I love keeping up with it, and for better or worse, I'm still really excited for the upcoming Star Wars movies, and I can't wait to see what happens with Star Wars in the future. But now I'm going to turn it over to you guys. What is your Star Wars movie ranking? Do you agree or disagree with my list? Which of the movies stick out to you the most? Whatever it is, feel free to share your thoughts down in the comments and let me know what you think. If you enjoyed hearing my thoughts on the Star Wars franchise, be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing so you'll never miss one of my videos. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you always.